turn to something slightly different. Don't know if anyone's seen at home, but Nigel Farage was doing some media interviews this morning, and he was asked about his game plan. And he suggested that he would provide a better opposition to a potential Labour government, and that he could lead some kind of Conservative reform coalition. Interested to know the views of our panel on that one.
Well, of course, we're still joined by political commentator Benedict Spence and political commentator Jonathan Liz. Two political commentators here. Benedict, can Farage really provide an opposition within Parliament?
I mean, well, we don't know how many seats the Tories are actually going to get. He could certainly provide a very vociferous opposition, even if not the most numerous. And that would, I suppose, depend on the makeup of the Conservative Party after the
I'm just imagining that image of Tiananmen Square, where there is one man, one solitary man standing against this line of tanks.
Now, well, for Farage, you've been driving tanks, so I think that's fortunately for Sir Keir Starmer can't set much of a military on Nigel Farage, as entertaining as that would be. In terms of leading a sort of a reform Tory coalition of opposition, I just can't see that would be in the best interests of either party. I mean, ultimately, Nigel Farage, he has no future with the Conservative Party. Even if they were to offer him some sort of olive branch at some point, they would try to do him over later on, because they understand, in much the same way as with Boris Johnson, there are some characters that are too large, actually, then to allow anybody else to breathe. That's why for a very long time, actually, there was a lot of opposition within the Conservative Party to allowing Boris Johnson to become leader, because everybody knew once he's there, it's going to be very, very, very difficult to get rid of him.
Well, it turned out not to be.
Well, it turned out not to be by his own, by his own stupidity, which is perhaps what they should have counted on. But nonetheless, there was the effort, of course, to make sure that he wouldn't be the leader the first time around when Theresa May did. I also think, ultimately, that the Reform Party is effectively the vehicle for Nigel Farage and his character at the moment. I think once you get rid of that, I think it begins to dissipate. And this is my issue that I have long-term with reform. It's a cult of personality. Now, I don't think that that's a bad personality, necessarily. He's a very charismatic person. He has lots of policies that chime a great deal with the public. But right now, it is basically just him. Nobody is going out, as intelligent and as interesting as they might be. Ben Habib is not getting people out on the stump. Neither is Richard Tice. They are not the big draws. It's Nigel Farage. If you sort of have him subsumed by the Conservatives, that's that.
No, well, he's not going to be subsumed by the Conservatives. If there's any party that's going to be subsumed, it's the Conservatives into reform. You could have this is like a hostile.
What if the Tories have 100 seats and Reform have 2?
It doesn't matter, Tom. This is if Farage is going to entertain any deal, it'll be on Farage's terms, because he knows that he is in the ascendant, he has momentum. The Conservatives, even at 100 seats, will be effectively decimated at a rump of a party.
Let's remind ourselves of what he said this morning. So he said, the Tories may well be dead, he said. So he thinks the Conservatives are just going to be essentially wiped out and not be able to provide an opposition. So he is the only person who could lead a centre-right party and provide
whatever it is, it's not going to be centre-right, Emily.
I'll offer a bet to anybody here on this panel that in 5 years, if only one of the parties survives, it'll be the Conservatives. In 10 years, I'll say absolutely that Reform won't be a major party and that the Conservatives still will be.
It's interesting.
If anybody wants to take that bet, I'll be 100 quid.
He talks about Canada, doesn't he?
We talk a lot about Canada in 1993. What happened? There was a new party called Reform that spoke to a lot of the issues that Reform in the UK speaks to. They actually displaced, in terms of the number of seats, the Conservatives, but when was it? 2005 that they finally got back into power. It took them a decade to sort of do the whole negotiations, dealings. They became the Conservative Party of Canada. Now, a lot of the leading figures were actually from the Reform Party, but the branding was still Conservative. Would that still count?
I don't think that's going to happen, then. I think if you look at the way that the Conservatives have run this election, and this is something that's gone slightly under the radar, is the way in which certain individuals have been parachuted into certain seats by the Conservative Party against the wishes of local members. And these tend to be people who are big fans of people like Rishi Sunak, or have been here SPADs or aides to people in that setup.
If anything, the party is becoming more moderate.
They are doubling. There is that you can see certain MPs talking about, no, the Tory party can't go to the right, it must stay in the centre. That's where elections are won. They are doubling down on this, and I do think it's going to be an existential battle between the two. But if it isn't a win for the centrists at the next leadership contest, it'll be a figure who is far enough to the right for it to not really matter so much what Nigel Farage does or says.
Is there not one figure who is actually not particularly far to the right, but is loved by a lot of people on the right, and who has actually been raised by a lot of people on the Tory left as the only only man to stop Nigel Farage if this future merger might appear a possibility?
John Major.
Boris Johnson.
Oh my God.
Well, that's what Margaret thinks.
Absolutely not.
Margaret says Boris
I thought you were going
and
to talk about
Nigel.
Priti Patel. I thought, man, which man? Boris Johnson.
Boris Johnson has been
Absolutely
raised
no
by
way,
Tory
no
centrists
way.
as
He's
the
been raised
Stop
by himself.
Farage man.
Farage. There's no chance that Boris Johnson is getting a sufficient purchase with the British public. He's not getting a second chance. He's having a quite nice life right now, earning an absolute fortune on the circuit. He would do it for his own vanity. Boris Johnson doesn't want to put the hard
Well, he's in
as
the
leader of the
Cotswolds,
opposition.
shaving very
He is.
I don't
sporadically.
know.
Yeah, exactly.
How many chances did the Italians give Berlusconi until he died?
And look
Basically,
what
they just
happened.
kept on giving him more and
And it
more.
didn't
Trump's
work out
about to
so
get-
well for
Trump's
Italy.
about to get another shot at the White House, and he organised a riot
Yes,
outside
never
the...
seen it.
People are very tolerant.
Winston Churchill, of course, did a few years on the American speaker
Well,
circuit
Boris
while
Johnson is
he was leader of the opposition.
Johnson is no Churchill, that's for sure.
Well, may I just say that Margaret says Boris and Nigel would be an unbeatable team. So there you go. You're not the only one thinking that could be a
Just kind of
possibility.
double-headed parties. You just end up with accusations of Tweedledum and Tweedledummer.